The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning all, and welcome to the latest in our webinar series. This is Locate Your Security Blind Spots. Now, I'm aware that some of you will not necessarily know Bytes Security Partnerships. Some of you will know us very, very well, and some of you will be very new to us organisation, perhaps through our sister company, Bytes Software Services. So for the benefit of those who are new to us, my name is Jeremy Edwards, and I currently sit on the sales management team for Bytes Security Partnerships. And what I'd like to do over the next 2 to 3 minutes before handing over to our guest speakers today is just give you a brief overview of ourselves as a business, of course, review the purpose of the webinar today and its subject matter, and as well, of course, introduce you to the speakers themselves. So, who are we? So who are Bytes Security Partnerships? So we've actually been working in this industry since 1999 and became part of the Bytes Technology Group in the UK in 2011 through a minor acquisition. In terms of our specialisation, we've been working a wide range of security-related areas, including, as you can see there, networks, content, application security, access, security intelligence more recently, of course, as we've seen in some areas over the last few years, breach and vulnerability management, mobile security, and of course, closely related to our subject matter this morning, data. So our goal as a business has always been to understand business challenges, some of the growth drivers you guys might be experiencing, and of course the individual organisations' needs, so that we can help customers complete successful security projects that benefit their organisation as a whole. And alongside the sales division of which I'm representative, we've strived to be able to set ourselves apart from many similar organisations by, where possible, providing in-house engineer services and, of course, support to complement the services and technology our customers procure through ourselves. So another part of the service of which we're experiencing today includes seminars, webinars, and, where possible, knowledge share and customer advice by investigating some specific subject matter, which, of course, lead us on to our webinar today. So, what is the challenge? What's the purpose of this webinar, and why is this particular area so relevant, and perhaps more relevant today than it has ever been? There's obviously some, as you can see now, I've just raised a few well-known areas or breaches of data and publicly listed data breaches that have perhaps had a wider impact on organisations' reputations due to poor retention or poor visibility of data within the organisation. So there's a few snippets here, but in summary, really, we're concerning ourselves today with potentially being data guardians. Where is data in the organisation? Who has access to it? Why do they have access, and how can we become more successful as data guardians for our businesses? I mean, due to increasing legislation, increased user privileges, reduced control of some parts of networks, and the gradual consumerization of the workplace with the introduction of some more flexible work schemes, access to wider cloud shared data, And of course, the challenge of controlling and securing data itself is ever increasing. Not to mention, the amount of legislation now in play exposing the risk of data loss to organisations is now not just something that the organisation might have had to deal with internally. There's now some increasing awareness of organisations globally. They will have to obviously declare data breaches, and that obviously has a greater impact as a whole. But at Bytes Security Partnerships, we've been looking at this challenge for many years now, and listening to information security departments across all of our clients who have been looking at this as a challenge since the late 2000s and into 2010. So today we're going to be looking at two complementary technologies looking to provide greater visibility to organizations, both in terms of data ownership and access, and as well as policy enforcement and control of that data, ensuring that as data guardians we've got a greater control of how we use that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our panelists today, one of whom is William Priestley from Varonis and Chris Jones of Forcepoint. So I believe I'll be handing over to William at this point. William, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. And if I should have it, tell me, can you see my slideshow? Let me just start that again. Okay, are we all set? Cool. Okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to be talking about how insiders are the new malware. What our employees do is one of our blind spots. We trust them. They're a great asset of ours in our organizations, but they can also be one of our greatest liabilities. And it's all part of that defense in-depth approach around protecting your data and your businesses against data breaches and trust exploits. Just to introduce myself, if the slide will go next. No. Forgive me, my looks like PowerPoint's frozen up. Clearly it's time for me to get a new laptop. Okay, apologies for that. Let's go again. Okay, right, resuming. Just to introduce myself, my name is William Priestley. I'm a systems engineer at Varonis, so a techie at heart. I've been with the organization for a few years now, and if you have any questions about anything I'm going to talk about, feel free to reach out to me at this email address or talk to your Bytes account manager who can help facilitate answers to those questions. First of all, I also like to thank Bytes for the opportunity to present our information here around insider threats and protecting your data. So for those of you that don't know about Varonis, we've been around for just over 11 years now. We are the market leader when it comes to protecting and governing your unstructured data assets, and that's about 85% of data that resides in the organization and is often the one that has the most challenges when it comes to having visibility and insights into what's going on with it. We have over 4,500 customers worldwide across many verticals, and as everyone has the same challenges when it comes to their unstructured data, and around 10% of that global customer base actually resides here in the UK. And we're also publicly traded, so we are accountable and regulated accordingly. And what Varonis does is we basically protect your data from insider threats by analyzing the behavior of the people and machines that access your data and detecting and stopping misbehavior, as well as helping you to enforce a least privileges model to mitigate risk from and limit damage when data breach activity does potentially occur within your environment. And just to kind of set the context here, last year the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report actually showed that organizations lost $400 million due to data breaches. So, it's actually it's not just your brand name that's at risk if it hits the headlines. There are real financial penalties for not having a good approach to protecting your information. So, what is it that I mean by that insiders are the new malware? Well, it's about having that trust exploit era that we're seeing. An employee is just an employee until they're really not, or an IT admin's just doing their job until the point where they're not. Or that USB stick in the CFO's pocket is convenient until it actually becomes very inconvenient when it's left in the wrong location. So, also, you can kind of characterize the kind of people that we've all met within our businesses, whatever role we've been, whichever company we've joined. There's always that individual that happens to click the link and starts off that zero-day threat, or the employee who's been in the business for years, has gone from role to role and aggregated their permissions along that time, and they have access to swaths of data, but they've been overlooked for promotion, and they're just unhappy and they want to leave, and they're going to take all those information assets with them to their new job. Or the employee who just, for some reason, constantly gets targeted and falls for the spear phishing attacks and lets their account get compromised and starts rolling all over your network and your data. Or the admins who just have the keys to the castle, no one's really monitoring what they do, and they know they can do whatever they want because, well, they're in charge of your IT assets. So, again, insiders, they are a significant threat. The SecureOnyx, and you can go to their website, did a survey last year, and the most expensive source of a data breach in 2015 was actually down to insiders, coming up at $144,000 per incident. And the Ponemon Institute also did a study last year by surveying employees and what they felt about the amount of data they had access to and how much visibility their employers had around what's going on with the data, and the stats are actually quite surprising. So, what happens with a data breach? Well, when it comes to a data breach, every single one goes through a process known as the kill chain. Now, for those of you that don't know what the kill chain is, it was a term coined by Lockheed Martin to quantify the stages of a cyber attack. In essence, it is the anatomy of a data breach that all people go through, whether knowingly or otherwise. Stages will include reconnaissance and intrusion, and then they'll be trying to gain access to as much information as possible before the final exfiltration of data and obfuscation or denial of service. And it's well established and well known that the higher up the kill chain you can identify malicious activity, the higher your chances of preventing a fully fledged data breach. So, Varonis basically have designed user behavioral analytic threat models where we can identify activity and align it to a kill chain category, thereby providing you context as to the threat that an insider might be presenting to your business. And how we do this? Well, we have a dedicated user behavioral analytics research team who look at data breaches, all the data breaches that have occurred. Here's an example from Sony. And we do this to identify new attack vectors, and we design threat models to detect the unusual behavior that were part of those attack vectors, and those threat models are then designed so we can alert on them within your business. And this is really culminating in what we call inside-out security. The perimeter has been in the market for a very long time. It is very important to have investments in a firewall. A lot of organizations have endpoint protection and data loss prevention. These are all different layers of security, and where Varonis comes in is really at the inside. We're very data-centric when it comes to how we protect your data. And again, it's about making sure you've got all that defense in depth so that if you've got no blind spots in your security strategy. And how do we do that? Well, we have a metadata framework. We understand exactly who all the users and groups in your organization are. We know exactly the access controls and how they have access to data. We understand that whether the data they have access to is sensitive or not, so we have that content context. And then we finally understand all user activity, whether it's a file create, modify, read, write, delete, GPO modification, email sent. We collect all of that activity, and that's what helps us to start baselining user behavior and alerting to when it becomes unusual. And with this inside-out approach, it's all about detecting, understanding where you have excessive access and remediating it to least privileges, baselining user behavior and taking that inventory, and then preventing that damage, limiting that damage. So if you did have a data breach with the least privileges model, the damage that they can do is limited, and also the chances of them accessing sensitive information is also vastly reduced. And we actually have tools to help you sustain that as you go forward. So when people do change roles, they're not permission aggregating as they go with it. So I mentioned user behavioral analytics, and I just want to explain what that is for those of you that may not be aware. So UBA is a science of analyzing user behavior and how employees access data and systems. It typically uses machine learning to analyze large amounts of data and baselines what is normal behavior. And it also profiles user roles so that you can really detect what is abnormal behavior for that particular role or entity. And a good example of UBA is your credit card company. They're analyzing millions of transactions to spot fraud by looking at what you buy, where and when you buy it, and all sorts of other factors, so that when your credit card is behaving abnormally, i.e. someone's taken it and trying to commit fraud against you, they can block it. You know, it's a common day. We're just doing that for your data, making sure that your data is protected when things aren't actually as normal. And Varonis has had UBA as part of its core algorithms since the inception of the company. You know, we analyze behavior across all unstructured data platforms, be it file systems, email, SharePoint, or even Office 365. And we can provide that additional and important context, such as user roles or content context, so that unusually, and this kind of information is the additional rich metadata that's not usually available to other solutions. So this additional context actually really enriches our user behavioral threat models and allows you to have accuracy in the data breach detection across those multiple platforms. And again, we've mapped all of our threat models to the kill chain. So when we do real-time alerts, you're aware of these events occurring in real time, and you can see the events occurring. And we even have provided you an automated instant response via things like scripting and PowerShell, which is very important for zero-day threats like ransomware. And just to kind of, how do we do this and show you, explain that to you? Well, we automatically identify the roles of individuals. So, you know, where are they based in the business? We understand who are the privileged accounts, who are the service accounts, or what are the service accounts, who are your executive accounts, because the reason we do that is these accounts have the broadest access to the most sensitive data within a business. And so they're obviously the accounts that are most targeted by attackers. So it's important for us to identify them and monitor them appropriately and baseline their behavior based on their role. Also, I'm sure we're all aware, executives are quite notorious for being the ones that click the links we all know shouldn't be clicked. So by that, we can baseline user behavior, and then we can also add extra context, such as the type of data they're accessing, how often, when they access it, as well as the content. Is it sensitive? Is it regulated? Is it no longer required? Is it abandoned and stale? Again, all of these add rich metadata to our user behavioral analytics and allow us to really accurately alert on those kinds of threat vectors that we mentioned before. So what does all this look like? Well, I'm about to go into a brief demo and show you, but if you're interested, we actually do have a free risk assessment, so we can actually show you user behavioral analytics in your environment, quantify where you have overexposed data, and please feel free to reach out to your Bytes account manager if you are interested in taking us up on that. So without further ado, I am going to go into the demo. You should be able to now see my demo box. This is the user interface for Data Advantage, our metadata framework. Just to give you a quick orientation, I've got all my users and groups that I mentioned before on the left here, sorry, on the right, so I can see all the members of groups. I've got all my monitored assets, so from file server, SharePoint, Exchange, Linux, Unix, Active Directory, as well as Office 365. I can see all the access controls on anything, so I can double click on finance to see who are the people that have access to it, Or I can flip it the other way around. Where does, say, the SEC IT systems have access? Again, getting visibility. Where would everyone or global access groups have access? So I can kind of see that some of these are inherited from global access groups like the everyone. I want to remediate that to least privileges. Again, I can see how many sensitive files are contained within each folder and what kind of classification hits are they. Is it PCI? Is it personally identifiable information? Is it information deemed as secure or confidential for my business? We can detect that information and provide that additional context. And lastly, we have that full audit trail, so you can do incident response, forensics, and identify exactly who's modifying GPOs or DS objects, who's the ones that are sending emails with attachments that they shouldn't be sending, who are the people that are deleting finance data that they shouldn't be. So when it comes to real-time alerting, this is where we have our data alert. And what we've done is, as I said, we've got those threat models that basically attack vectors that we've identified as ways that people will try and gain information and exfiltrate it from the business, and we've aligned them to the kill chain. So you can see we've got, privilege escalation, lateral movement, 2 paths to gaining as much access to as much information as possible. People doing reconnaissance and intrusion, which are the early phases, and again that exfiltration of data. And it's really these middle layers that people don't necessarily pay attention to. You've got people that at the DLP and the endpoint, you're looking at the exfiltration. That's where you're really going to stop people taking that data out. So that's like the lower part of the kill chain. What we're doing is trying to go in that middle ground, those earlier phases where people are starting to interact with the data in a way that they've never done before. And just to show some examples, if I type in sensitive, then I can see all the data, so all the threat models that are used to do with people accessing sensitive data that they've never accessed before, or accessing more of it than they have before. We trust our employees to access sensitive data. So, that's fine. We have to trust them to do their jobs. But if they're suddenly abusing their access and gaining access to more and more data than they really need to, we can detect that unusual behavior and alert on it. And not just the people that try and grab it all at once. We actually do have the accumulative access, so people that are trying to do it piece by piece, slowly over time to try and avoid detection. We still detect that behavior because we're baselining their behavior. Other kinds of activity that we can detect are things like privilege escalations. So where people are trying to change global access groups, trying to add global access groups to ACLs, try to add themselves to privileged group membership, people trying to modify GPOs or trying to gain access to system files that may contain credentials. We can detect all of this activity and alert you in real time on it. And last and not least, the zero-day threat that everyone is a bugbear of everyone at the moment, ransomware. Oops, no E. So yes, we actually detect ransomware. And we're signatureless. We don't require to understand what is the new variant, how can we detect its signature and alert on it. We've taken all the existing variants out in the wild. We've analyzed their behavior in terms of how they do the encryption, whether it's a copy and then a delete and then encrypt, or a modify and then a delete, or a modify only. We basically have looked at all of these behaviors about the core core encryption engine of these ransomware models, and we've created threat models to detect them, including slow burners, because there are new variants now that don't do a big rapid encryption. They do a slow piece-by-piece encryption to avoid rapid variation detection. But we still detect them. And again, we also can, as I said, give you a proactive way of preventing ransomware and that zero-day threat by allowing you to execute a PowerShell script, which will so here we go, execute the script, so you can kill the authentication sessions, disable the account, and prevent that from encrypting the entirety of your data. And again, you can protect yourself further by restricting access to least privileges, siloing the amount of damage that any account could do. And again, you have the forensics to know exactly which data was encrypted, so you restore that from backup, and you know which account was compromised, so you can go and find out how that vector came into your environment in the first place. But that's all well and good. We've got the threat models, but we have the dashboard for you to really consume that data. Where are these alerts coming in? Apologies, this is kind of simple and basic. I've put this together this week, so I can't actually do a full UBA organization amount of data in my spare time. So I've got a few simple rules that are alerted. This is the dashboard. You can see who are the top alerted users, the top alerted assets, whether it's Exchange, directory services, SharePoint, or file servers, the top alerted models. Again, you can scroll down and see how many of the kill chain phases are being hit. And this is the high-level dashboard. And then you can really come down and drill down into the forensics so you can see where are the alerted events happening. So, yeah, there we go. So I can see exactly the events. I can see, right, I've got some finance files deleted. It's a rule I created. Because sometimes I want to be like, well, if someone adds a certain group to my finance data, I want to know about it. And I can scroll down and see all of the alerts that were triggered against this. I can even pick on one of these and just go into it in more detail. So there we go. So I can see who is the user doing it. So double-clicked because I'm too impatient. There we go. So let's see. Expand that out. We can see that Margaret was a person that deleted the file. I can see that which object was it. It's it will say March billing if I expand that out. That's even useful. So yeah, March 2003 billing. I can see how many sensitive hits it has. So it's content that's sensitive. It's got 5,000 types of sensitive data in it. Could be as it's finance data, whatever I choose. But the other thing is, right, Margaret's been doing this activity. I can then actually open a context card and understand more about who Margaret is in the business. So here it comes up, whilst I wait for IIS to catch up with me. There we go. So there we go. So that's Margaret. We can see exactly who she is. She's in HR. I can see who her manager is. I've got the contact details for her manager. And I can basically see which threat models has she been hitting, which assets has she been hitting, how many of the kill chain phases has she been going through. This is great. If I see someone working down the kill chain, chances are that's a data breach in action, and I can take immediate action straight away. Again, I come back, I can contact the manager saying, by the way, Margaret tried to delete finance data. Is that normal? So, well, actually, Margaret, we just had an argument. She handed in a notice this morning. So yeah, that's unusual. We should, seize her assets and kick her out of the building. Or it could be, oh yeah, no, Margaret's got a new role. She's cleaning up our finance data because we're getting rid of old stuff. We don't need that anymore. So yes, this is fine. It's normal behavior for now because it's a change in job role. She has changed her behavior, but by giving you that visibility and giving you the ability to go back to the business, really helps you see what's going on and cover yourself in terms of those security blind spots where you wouldn't be auditing or monitoring that data. And lastly, just to wrap up before I hand over to my good colleague Chris, is we can report on that. Pre-prepared this, but all of those things, sometimes for things like the data protection regulation, the EU GDPR, you have to report a data breach within 72 hours. So here we have, we've detected it, and all you have to do is run a simple report to get all the alerts that have been fired. Again, you can export that as an PDF or XML or whatever you want, hand that to the Data Protection Authority or the auditors or the regulators in a very quick and easy and timely manner to make sure you're compliant to these new regulations. And that's me. Thanks very much for your time, and I will now hand over to Chris.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. So I'll just get myself set up to go through my content now. Bear with me one moment. So hopefully everyone can hear me fine and see my screen okay. I'm sure one of the people from Bytes Security Partnerships will let me know if that's not the case, but we appear to be all ready to go. So yeah, my name is Chris Jones and I'm one of the sales engineers at Forcepoint. You may previously have known us as WebSense, but there's been a lot of changes and extra technology coming into our organization in the last few months. I want to cover off some of those technologies that we've had added to our solution stack and also just give you a refresher on some of the other things that we're doing. So this is all going to be about the data tools that we have, because we have data loss prevention, but also data discovery tools, as well as taking a look into our fairly new addition, which is the insider threat capabilities. So we'll talk a bit about the kill chain as far as Varonis see that, and I thought that was probably a nice angle to lean into as well, as it's something that we use extensively as well. I'm certainly not going to cover every single stage of this because a lot of it is relevant to perhaps our email solutions or our web security solutions where this malicious content gets in the first place and you stop it. What I wanted to focus on was some of the last two stages, because this is something that would happen once you've already been infected with malware. And a lot of the data tools and the insider threat capabilities we have are great at not only detecting when those things have entered into your organization, but to mitigate against them, make sure the data cannot get out in the first place or anything along those lines. So again, I'm not going to cover off every single thing that we have within the Forcepoint portfolio. I did want to have it visible for anyone that's on the call today anyway, just so you can see the kind of the large amount of things that we also do around content security, cloud security, network security. But again, the real focus of this session, and really to kind of tie it into what Will from Varonis was saying, is all about this insider threat capabilities and data protection, and those security blind spots that you would have as an organization. So first I wanted to make a bit of a distinction between the data loss tools and the insider threat detection. And this fits in quite nicely with the 4D security message that we have within Forcepoint, all about this concept of defending, detecting, deciding what to do with that data, and then actually defeating it and stopping those attacks in their steps. Data loss really sits within the defend and the defeat side of things, whereas insider threat is much more analytical and therefore is detecting and giving you analytics around the users and then giving you the information to decide what to do. It's not a blocking tool in the same way that a data loss prevention service would be. Of course, DLP can quite comfortably do auditing and do that sort of analysis. Insider threat, because it's much more ingrained into what a user is doing and looking at lots of different attributes, of course it makes more sense if it's able to monitor, to understand, and to give you the information and ammunition that you need to do something. So talking firstly about some of our data loss and data discovery tools, the real key thing to understand, and the best place to start if you're looking at any sort of data project, is the data itself. I think Will mentioned this as well. You've got to understand what you are looking for first before you can start to plan where you're looking for it, who might be using it, what you want to happen if it is seen. All of those things are very valid to the conversation, but if you don't start with this concept of what is our critical information, then everything else becomes that much more complicated to baseline and to put into action. So we do quite a lot of things with DLP, and different variants of our solutions, for example, our cloud email solution as an example, may have some fairly entry-level data tools, whereas our full data suites and ones integrated with our appliances and the like are going to have all of the capabilities that we could possibly bring to bear around data. So we would break this down into concepts of enterprise DLP or DLP Lite. The light side of things you may see in lots of tools, and this may be keywords, phrases, dictionaries, things that you can put together yourself, things that come pre-built within the solution, and also the ability to create regular expressions. Now those tools are fine, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them, and in a lot of cases they're incredibly handy. However, they do also have the unfortunate habit of giving a lot of false positives and potentially being quite a lot of work to put together in the first place. And of course, the more of them you want, the more scanning is involved. To put an example around that, something like personal identifiable information, what is key in that GDPR regulation that was mentioned just a few moments ago. We have rules for PII, and that's going to be a mixture of analytics, context-based information, keywords, phrases, dictionary tools, regular expressions, all coming together to make what we call a content classifier to look for that identifiable information. In other tools, it may be a much simpler version of that. Add to that, we've got probably getting on for about 2,000 of these high-level dictionaries and templates that you can use out of the box and have set up within probably 5 or 6 clicks of a mouse. So very easy to get those set up, and they can be very comprehensive, but they certainly aren't the be-all and end-all. They really are better for either very simple things or for regulatory compliance. When we get into the more enterprise DLP side of things, and again those dictionaries can be complex enough to fit into that paradigm, we'd be looking for other things. So we have this concept called fingerprinting, whereby you can decide that a SharePoint server or SharePoint file contains particularly sensitive information, or what could be absolutely anything. Could be our CRM system, could be something stored in the Office 365 arena. But you know that that is your sensitive information. We then take a fingerprint of that. That allows us to then recognize that bit of data in whatever format it might take across all of our solutions. And this can take the lines, as I said, of CRM system data, so databases and like, or very, very unstructured information. So we have Formula One organization to Blueprint, who scan and fingerprints all of the blueprints and design documents. We have engineering and manufacturing firms who do similar things. We have legal firms that scan contracts, as well as software organizations that are looking to maintain their intellectual property. And fingerprinting can be a very, very specific target, or it can even be a bit broader if we've taken this idea of machine learning where we're picking up the context around it. I mentioned software designers for a moment. Being that software constantly changes and evolves from literally minute to minute, having an exact fingerprint, that is probably not the best step forward. So the machine learning equivalent of that is better, because then we recognize the changes, we recognize the basic template and what that would look and feel like. So understanding all this gets the starting point, the data in mind. We can, within the policy, do some much more interesting pieces. I thought I'd separate some of these out just to highlight them before I show you a policy a bit later. Again, Varonis brought up this concept of drip feeding information and breaking it out into small parts. We can do that in data loss as well, because it's quite likely that you don't want to stop people uploading customer records, for example, or emailing them out, because that may be their job. But that, of course, could lead to risk, as they can get around a solution if you're not monitoring for single instances. Perhaps we set the threshold at 5 or 10 or whatever is right is necessary. Optical character recognition, a classic way to get around a DLP solution, is just to screen print what you're doing, because of course then we're not scanning text, we are looking at an image file. That of course is no issue for us. We'll just do OCR on that and identify what it is. And again, final thing we have is some behavioral analytic information based into that. So this may take the form of cyberbullying, or people who are unhappy with their job, and that could be kind of indicators of risk. So there's lots of different angles to this. So what I'm going to do next is give you some demonstrations of the two products that are relevant to the conversation today. I'm going to start with the DLP, with the InsideOut threat, where I've got a short video just to highlight what this might look like and what we can then do with it. And then I'm going to move into a live demonstration of our DLP product to show you what's in policy creation and what that would look like, and finally show you the incidents and reports. So this is our insider threat capability. It's an endpoint-based system, and it is monitoring all of the behaviors of what those users are doing. So there's a lot of things that it has access to and visibility over. This is a dashboard, so you can see roughly what is going on, and here on this particular day we've had a spike. What we also are seeing here is our highlighted top risky users. Our bottom 3 are scoring, well, frankly, less than 1, but we have had 3 people there that have been scoring fairly high. Now, of course, what constitutes as high in an organization is up to you, so this is all tunable. But let's drill down into one of these and see exactly what that risky behavior actually looks like. So we've gone down into this user. We've got the Active Directory information within here, so we can see a bit of information there. Again, we've got that 90-day risk score trend unique for this particular user that shows generally what they are doing. But then on the right-hand side, we've got the actual things that they have been doing. So we can see here that they started a number of processes, including downloading Dropbox from the internet and then installing it, which may not be particularly suspicious in and of itself, but is interesting. We can see a number of other things happening there. Let's expand a few of those. What we can see is that they've been trying to open files and also trying to work out how to switch on private browsing and searching for how to do that within Internet Explorer and Firefox. Again, not necessarily suspicious on its own, but things do start to add up. What they've now done is try to disable the insider threat agent, and they tried to do that 6 times. Now, of course, they've actually failed because that isn't possible for this particular user. But they believe they have, and we know that they have, because what they've done is actually copied a file from some finance area and uploaded it to Dropbox. Now, all of those individual things might not necessarily be suspicious or could come across as accidental. A way to highlight that information, in the top 10 policy events, it shows you exactly what's going on. But to really add into what is happening, what we've got is a video of every step of what that user has been doing. I'll focus on the very last side of this because this is actually them stealing the data. And this is what the insider threat capability has the ability to do. It's about proving what is happening. So here we have absolute proof that that user has themselves, because we can see it on their desktop, uploaded that file to Dropbox, as well as all of the visibility of every other step that we highlighted within that. Now, this is a great tool for a lot of reasons. It's very easy from this video to talk about how we just prove that this user has done something malicious. But a lot of times, in fact, more often than not with this product, it's actually used to exonerate users. Will of Varonis earlier talked about insiders being the new malware, which is certainly the case, but what we also have is this instance of compromised users internally who don't know that they are now a threat to the organization, but to any administrator, anyone looking at it, including within that Varonis technology where we're looking at escalated privilege and what they've been accessing, is going to appear to it. Using the insider threat as an additional capability gives us proper context and we can really see exactly what has been going along. So what I want to do now is branch into the actual DLP product as well, and just show you a few other things. One thing I did want to pick up for before we looked at the very specifics is within our web solution. And I talked about that kill chain and data theft and uploads going on. You may not decide to have a full-blown DLP solution, and it may be that trying to fingerprint and classify your data is quite a big project. Even our standard web solution, however, can pick up for threats, because if a piece of malware gets onto your devices, chances are the first thing it's going to do is try and communicate out over the internet. It's going to try and get further instructions, send further files, do things. So we classify those as critical threats, and I can see here I have my top user has generated a number of critical threats. This indicates to me that that device is infected with some malware, and I want to do a bit more, I want to do something with it. By drilling down into this stage of a report, it tells me a lot about what is actually going on with that. So all of the user's AD information, IP data, where the information would have gone, what the URLs it was accessing to. If it did steal particular files, we would actually have those visible and be able to see exactly what that file is. And it again ties into what was said earlier about things like the crypto locker attacks and anything similar along those lines. They're going to need to get out, they're going to need to try and upload that information. Whilst we're not sat at the point where we can stop them doing the information internally, we can certainly stop them communicating outbound, announcing their presence and doing any of the really, really damaging side of things. So that is, in a lot of ways, is an element of data loss, because we are using data analytics and techniques to detect that type of malware. But it's not DLP in our classic sense. That's what I want to show you finally. What I will do, rather than focusing on everything within this product, I'll show you briefly what a policy looks like, and then finish up by looking at an incident report so you can see the level of visibility and actionable intelligence that you have. So it shouldn't take us more than, say, 2 to 3 minutes. So if I just go into one of my example policies here, and you can see roughly how that sits together. Now, of course, we have a name and who manages this policy. The first thing that we are looking for is the data itself. So the policy, you define what we're looking for. Now this may have come from one of the fingerprints you've done. It may come from the regular expressions and compliance templates. And by the way, there's a registration window, that wizard rather, that allows you to get this set up and running very, very quickly. So we've decided what we are looking for, and we can decide how much of that we're looking for in certain instances. We then look at what are we going to do within this. So I've built this as a drip DLP side of things because I want to see what is happening over a period of time. Now when I reach my first threshold, I'm only going to create a low-level instance, and I'm just going to audit it because I don't want to stop it, but I do want to know what is going on. At a second threshold, I'm going to create a medium-level instance. I'm still going to audit it, but I'm going to generate a notification to whoever you feel would be necessary, maybe to educate the users, maybe to notify the management or asset owners that something is going on. When I hit my third threshold, I'm going to create a high-level instance, and then I'm going to take in this case, it's a block action. Now, all of those actions, by the way, are highly configurable. So it may be that means to route via an encryption server. It may be they have an endpoint that pops up and asks the user to give their reason for what they're doing. Pretty much anything that you can think of, including running custom scripts and doing anything like along those lines. I've also separated that into low, medium, and high because it makes it easier for me to separate my instance to say, well, I only want to look initially at my high-level instance, see the really bad data breaches first and foremost. Of course, it's all up to you. Next within the policy, the source. So who does this apply to? Typically everyone, but I see lots and lots of instances where there's different versions of policies for different people in AD groups and machines and networks and along the lines. And then finally we have the destination. So where is it going? There's a lot of different options that you have within here. I'll just go through the main headings here that we can look at. The email, web, mobile email device, endpoint printers and printers in general, applications, remove media, and within the actual network itself across that LAN. There's various different things that you can do within here. So for example, on the endpoint applications, it may be that you want to stop people from copying and pasting or doing print screen just as an action. No bother that we can actually still read the OCR on that print screen, but we can stop them doing it in the first place. Removable media, maybe we want to have an exception to that removable media so that encrypted devices can go to that. And again, various different permutations on that, but I'm aware of time. So what I want to do to finish up that is to show you what a number of instances would actually look like and that intelligence that you would get and what you could do with it. So there's a lot of information on here. I won't read through everything that we have there, but I will point out some of the things I think are useful, including who it was that did this, the policy or policies that they've breached. Very critical is the channel that's gone on. But, so the main thing is, was this blocked? Was this allowed? Was it quarantined? Did we take another action with it? If I go to, for example, this email instance we have here, we can see the policies that it is breached, my super secret data do not leak policy. See all of the property information associated with that, including things like manager and destination information. This links in, by the way, with all of our email and web solutions if you're using them to give you even better information. But one of the nice features is the ability to look at the file that has actually been leaked in this particular case. So I can download that file and see an exact copy of it, assuming I have the proper admin rights. And as you would imagine, by the way, within this project, there's lots of different permutations on what you can do from an administration perspective as to what visibility you have. And the final thing I just want to leave with you, I've talked about this from the concept of data loss. We also have the ability to do data discover. So if you have fingerprinted information, or if you're looking for regulatory compliance information, personal identifiable information, you can create a policy that will scan your network and tell you exactly where that information is. Sorry about that. So where that information is, and then you can target it and run scripts on it. What we're not doing, which is where the relationship with Varonis and Forcepoint could come into play, is we're not looking at the administration rights and who's accessing it. We are just telling you with discovery, where that information actually exists, so you know to target it or to remove it, and with the loss information, what is happening when it moves outside of your network or within it potentially. So with that finishes my presentation. If you do have any further questions for me, my email address is cjones@forcepoint.com, or of course you can also just contact Forcepoint directly, and we'll be able to provide you with some much more in-depth information because I've only touched the surface. So with that, I will pass back to Jeremy to see if there's any further questions, but thank you for your time.
Chris Jones, thank you very much for the latter part of the webinar there. Just briefly, we've got a few moments for a couple of questions from the audience, and please do text in any further questions you might have. The first one is actually for yourself and Varonis. You mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation a way in which Varonis are helping to initially assess and perhaps provide some element of elevated visibility at an early stage, so potentially even before a company embarks on a project. Could you just give us a little bit more information about how that assessment provides customers with a greater level of visibility, and potentially what the contents of those sorts of reports are and how they're presented?
Certainly. So we basically will install our software, it takes about 90 minutes, and we can monitor a subset of your unstructured data assets. We will look at all the permissions across every folder, site, or mailbox. We look at exactly which users are accessing what. We look at the sensitivity of content, so data classification in the same vein as what Chris described. And we put that all together in a very executive level report and presentation, which will have, quantified numbers. So customers will have, say, 20–25% of your folders are open to global access groups. Obviously, that means you want to restrict that to these privileges because you've got this amount of sensitive data, and plus, 20% of your sensitive data is open to global access groups. You've got empty security groups. You've got unresolved SIDs. There's all sorts of information that's around security risks and gaps on your unstructured data assets, and we have and then we'll go through what we would recommend in terms of reducing that access and reducing mitigating that risk, basically, as well as as you saw, the data alert dashboard. We can start to profile general user behavior and show you alerts on where people are starting to deviate near the end of that trial.
Okay, so the result of that is that we would be able to provide end users with a good level of visibility into the structure of AD in their organization, how it is presenting data to end users, and hopefully a way to quickly mitigate some areas, while also providing some elevated levels of control. I do have another question, and actually this one is for Chris at Forcepoint. Chris, obviously with regards to DLP, not just from Varonis aspect, but in terms of the control elements that Forcepoint are able to provide, have you got any sort of areas or ideas around how Forcepoint might help people who are looking to cloud?
So yeah, there's a few things you can do. I mean, I suppose cloud is quite a broad term there, so there's a lot of different variations on that. But one that I suppose I'm coming across quite a lot is this is Office 365, probably the biggest cloud-based system out there. So a lot of our DLP tools can actually hook into Office 365, and that can be either from a normal on-premise solution of ours, where we can just still fingerprint information that's in the Office 365 SharePoint cloud, and even to the point of putting in things like our email gateways into the Azure cloud, so we can scan email that is going outbound from Office 365 hosted Exchange servers, and then do full analysis for any sort of DLP instance at that level. Because of course, if you've got a hosted Exchange, suddenly becomes much, much trickier for you to normally scan for DLP incidents, because at your level they're no longer SMTP, they're HTTP. It's going into a web browser. So things like that really come into play. But again, we've got lots of plug-in with other cloud vendors and analytics. Really, I think a big chunk of that is identifying the data in the first place. So another common one I come across is Salesforce.com, the ability for us to fingerprint your CRM system even though it is purely cloud-based.
Fantastic. Well, we're rapidly coming towards midday. So on that note, Chris and Will, I would just like to thank you for your time in presenting to the audience this morning. And again, I'd encourage any of those who have been listening and watching today, please, if you have any further questions or queries around the product areas or the challenges we've discussed today, please do contact your account manager at Bytes Security Partnerships, or indeed go onto our webpage should you not have a direct contact and use the security sales contact information. Outside of that, we will also be presenting those who haven't been on today and those of you who have attended with a link to the recording from today's session, which you're welcome to use and distribute accordingly within your own organisations. And that will be sort of in the form of an email generated by our team later on today or tomorrow. So once again, thank you very much to both the panelists today in providing this overview, and to all of you who've been part of this session today. Thank you very much for taking the time out, and please do, as I say, contact us with any further queries you might have. Many thanks.